Tune into Nice Radio every Saturday at 7:30 a.m. for A View from the Outside, hosted by Brereton Horne. A View from the Outside takes a look at key issues affecting St Vincent and the Grenadines and gives a global perspective on how these issues are viewed. Host Brereton Horne will examine a variety of topics to enlighten, stimulate debate, and explore solutions. Hear the facts, hear the real-life stories, hear A View from the Outside. Join Brereton Horne at 7:30 a.m. every Saturday on Nice Radio for A View from the Outside.
This society needs a spectacle. It might help us to see some evil. This society needs a spectacle.
On A View from the Outside this week being the 20th of August 2022, we look at the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, usually referred to as PACE, P-A-C-E, with the view asking whether the time has come for the reintroduction of such similar legislation to monitor and curb police behaviour in St Vincent and the Grenadines, especially because of the reported lack of trust in the police, the steady increase in the reported cases of police brutality, and reports of police acting outside of the interest of justice for all in the country. PACE is an important piece of legislation which was originally passed in the United Kingdom in 1984, and it applied in St Vincent and the Grenadines via Cap 12, Application of English Law Act of the Revised Laws of St Vincent and the Grenadines 1990. In St Vincent and the Grenadines, PACE was Act number 36 of 1989. PACE still exists in the United Kingdom. However, the Unity Labour Party regime in St Vincent and the Grenadines repealed PACE in 2007. PACE is important because it makes legislative provisions for the powers and duties of the police when dealing with those in police detention, criminal evidence, search warrants, and police discipline, among other things. Essentially, PACE was there to ensure that those who were arrested or otherwise taken into police custody in St Vincent and the Grenadines were treated fairly and humanely, and that the police officers who detained such persons acted within the limits of the Act. PACE was there to ensure that the evidence collected and presented in the courts of law against those accused met the relevant test and standards for admission in the court, and that trials were conducted fairly and without prejudice. PACE was a piece of legislation to ensure the protection of the human rights and dignity of Vincentians. Yet, the Unity Labour Party government or regime saw it fit to repeal the legislation under the guise that, according to the head of the regime, and I quote, lawyers couldn't be certain as to where PACE applies. So, you can imagine the confusion in the heads of policemen and women, unquote. Such argument is considered most imprudent, since the role of the courts is to interpret legislation such as PACE, and in the case of PACE, they have been doing so successfully since 1984 in the United Kingdom, and since 1989 before the abolition of it in 2007 in St Vincent and the Grenadines. In fact, the result, as we shall see, has been worse than if PACE was in force. But maybe, and we say just maybe, what obtains now was the goal of the Unity Labour Party regime in repealing PACE in the first place. PACE was first introduced in the United Kingdom due to the various police brutalities, deaths in police custody, and forced confessions of suspects, which led to a string of wrongful convictions. Since the Unity Labour Party regime abolished PACE in St Vincent and the Grenadines in February 2007, it has been observed and reported that instances of police brutality and abuse of police powers have consistently been on the rise. The local newspapers and other media sources are inundated with reports about several instances of police brutality which have taken place in St Vincent and the Grenadines since the repeal of PACE. Today, we, here on A View from the Outside, highlight a few examples of these, with the knowledge that you, the listener, may be aware of many more. On Independence Day, on the 27th of October 2008, several residents of central Kingstown blocked the road to the annual Independence Parade to protest several incidents of police brutality in and around the constituency. In 2010, there were several reports of police officers failing to properly investigate complaints made to them by Vincentians. On other occasions, police officers were said to be intimidating and threatening people with arrests or abusing and beating people whom they have arrested. In one instance, the police were said to have beaten and kicked an arrested person several times in the stomach and chest. The head of the ULP regime indicated that an accusation of police brutality made against the Commissioner of Police and other police officers will not be investigated. Imagine for a moment that even the police commissioner is being accused of police brutality by an accused person, and rather than allowing legislation to guide the process as to how the matter is to be dealt with, a politician, in fact, the head of the government in St Vincent and the Grenadines, stepped in to dispose of the matter. Imagine that for a moment. How abominable one may think of such interference. More recently, there have been examples of police pushing and brutalizing Vincentians while on the protest line at various protest activities in Kingstown, the capital. Vincentians, and the world at large for that matter, will remember the various forms of abuse carried out by police on civilians during protest action in Kingstown on the 5th of August 2021, when a protest against the ULP regime's draconian response to the COVID-19 pandemic took place. Vincentians and the rest of the world have seen the video and photographs and have read about how Carly John, the husband of opposition Senator Chevron John, was brutalized by the police in St Vincent and the Grenadines on September 9th, 2021, at a protest in Kingstown. He was held in a chokehold by an officer for an extended period of time, so much so that he had to be rushed to the Milton Cato Memorial Hospital and placed on oxygen to avoid suffocation, which could have resulted in his death. Yet, Carly John was slapped with 3 charges for resisting arrest and causing actual bodily harm to an officer in the execution of his duty. It is of note that no known investigation into the actions of the police officer or officers has taken place, and to date, no charges have been laid against the officer for placing Carly John in a chokehold. It is worth pausing to reflect on and remember that it was a similar situation in Minneapolis in the USA, which caused the death of George Floyd. On the 29th of July 2021, Kenson King was pushed and shoved in the chest at a protest in Kingstown by 3 to 4 police officers. To date, it is not known if any investigation into those incidents of police brutality or any charges have been brought against the police officers who pushed, shoved, and manhandled Kenson King. There are several reports in the media and outside of the media about the police turning up at the homes of Vincentians without search warrants, arrest and detain them without informing them of the reason for their arrest. Pace provided that an officer must tell the person why he or she is being arrested and why the police officer is arresting them. Many have also seen and will know that Vincentians are detained at police stations across the country for long and excessive periods of time without being charged, sometime over an entire weekend. Kenson King, Adriana King, and others, including the now deceased Ras Oba, may his soul rest in peace, have been subjected to this sort of police brutality. Pace makes it clear what the rules are for detaining those suspected or accused of an offence. Without Pace, and in the face of an unclear criminal code or law, the police in St Vincent and the Grenadines are said to abuse their powers with impunity. The questions must be asked whether the police in St Vincent and the Grenadines actually know what their powers are, and how are they to know in the face of such unclear criminal code and when there is no legislation which sets out their powers. It is true that other countries in the Caribbean have abolished Pace, including Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. But they have all replaced Pace with other legislation which provides for the protection which were contained in Pace. In St Vincent and the Grenadines, that void has not been filled, and the police are left to abuse and mistreat citizens with impunity and seemingly without accountability. It is inconceivable that a government, any government, and in this case the ULP regime, would abolish a law such as Pace unless there is some underlying motive or motives. One can formulate various opinions as to what that motive was or to what those motives were. But what many have surmised is that there was every intention, it seems, to create a police state in St Vincent and the Grenadines. One thing that is certain, however, is that any defender of civil liberties and human rights ought to be appalled and seriously concerned that the regime in St Vincent and the Grenadines abolished such a piece of legislation which sat at the very heart of the criminal justice system in the country. But abolish it they did. It is worth noting that since the introduction of Pace in the United Kingdom, the many cases of police brutalities and atrocities, including the fabrication of evidence and forced confessions, which led to a string of wrongful convictions, have been reduced dramatically and drastically, if not obliterated altogether. Having looked at these examples, one may think that the question as to whether police brutality or the perception of police brutality is lessened or increased since the abolition of Pace in St Vincent and the Grenadines, whether that question has been clearly answered. In fact, one may conclude that such behaviour by the police is out of control in the country. The examples are glaring and many. They include the cases of C.J. Weeks, the young man that met his untimely death earlier this year in an incident which reportedly involved the police of St Vincent and the Grenadines. There was the case of the 49-year-old Silma Kodo Thomas of Chateaubriand, who died in hospital following a police raid on her home. An investigation set to be conducted into her death is yet to be released to the public. In 2020, police officer Detective Sergeant Philbert Chambers was shot and killed. Also shot and killed during the same incident was Gleason Lewis, whom the police described as a person of interest. A full inquiry is yet to be carried out to determine the full circumstances of that incident. Just a few days ago, a video surfaced from Eyewitness News Online, which showed that a Clare Valley resident, Inigas Miguel, cried after he was acquitted of charges relating to marijuana. He stated and described in graphic terms that police officers brutalized him when they arrested him. And of course, there are many more examples which can be cited. Vincentians, with the examples mentioned, as well as with the issues that you are aware of, we can all agree that PACE or a similar piece of legislation is needed to set out standards and the standards of behaviour of the police during an investigation, which at the same time offers protection for the people of St Vincent and the Grenadines. Vincentians, it is up to you to determine what happens next. Until next week, this is Brereton Horne with a view from the outside, with a reminder to send your feedback as usual to aviewfromtheoutside@hotmail.com. We also invite you to visit and like our Facebook page at A View from the Outside, and also to visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel at JMB Horne. Have a pleasant Saturday, a wonderful Sunday, and a productive week ahead, with the focus on police brutality and the need to reintroduce PACE or similar legislation in St Vincent and the Grenadines.